Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey, everybody, it's Jared with All Things Crime. Welcome to another episode. I'm super excited today to bring in Theron Vines, who is the president of Pure Gold Forensics down in Southern California. And I've known Theron a little while, and I'll tell you, I've been looking forward to this discussion for quite some time. He's been just crazy busy, so I haven't been able to get him on until now, but we've captured him, and here we are. We're gonna have a fantastic discussion today. Theron, welcome.
Hey, good morning.
How's life in Southern California?
Can't complain. It's 80 degrees outside right now. A little bit windy, but it's perfect California weather. So I can't really complain. I'm sure it's pretty brutal up in Utah right now.
Actually, it's not too bad, man. It's like yesterday was 45, I think. And that's t-shirt weather for us, man.
Yeah.
Talking to some of my friends in Florida, and I tell them, yeah, we were like stripping coats off when it gets over 40 degrees, and they're just like, what? You're out of your mind. Yeah, it's kind of fun. But hey, it's just, that's one of the great things about what I do, not just with M-Vac Systems, but also with All Things Crimes. I get to talk to people from all over the country and all over the world for that matter. And so, but I wanted to especially get you on because you have a pretty unique experience. And you're doing some pretty unique things with Pure Gold Forensics. And so I think it'd be really interesting to get into that. So let's get started with, first of all, how about your background? How did you end up where you are?
It's a really weird, interesting story for me. I was in college to be a dentist. My dad's a dentist, saw that, looked very interesting to me, went to college, had the pre-medical, pre-dental schooling. Took a little bit longer than I cared to admit, but doing that, I had a BS in biology, but taking that extra time, I added a minor in chemistry, which turns out, later down the line, that a couple of those classes in that minor in chemistry fulfill the FBI quality assurance standards for courses. So it just so happened that I got those extra courses because it took a little longer in college. So when I graduated college, I was like, I am not going to school anymore. Looking at that 4-year dental school and looking at the hit I'm going to take in student loans, I was like, this is not for me. And I ended up just walking into a lab here in Southern California and said, hey, I will, throw out trash. I'll mop the floors for free if I can just get some experience. Got some experience. Turned out they were kind of on their way out. So I got a lot of their desk benches, lab benches, things like that for, fractions of the dollar. And that's how I started Pure Gold. Never worked for a public crime lab. A lot of private lab folks have worked for a public crime lab before they start this. And I never had that experience. So I'm not sure, every day I waffle back and forth, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm leaning as time goes on and leaning towards more of a good thing. So yeah, that's my quick and rough background.
Wow, it's so interesting. So you, when did you graduate college?
In 2009.
Oh, so, that was only what, 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're still a young buck, man. That's awesome. Enjoy it.
I'm getting close to the 40 mark. So.
All right on. Well, yeah. Let me know when you hit 50 and we'll talk. So, well, it is pretty interesting. And I know with your partner being Susanna Ryan and all of her experience, including in the public lab sector, that, she brings a little different of a experience level, to your lab. And so you guys make a great team.
Oh yeah.
And tell you, there's a few labs around the country that I just do not hesitate to ever send a customer to, and you guys are definitely one of them. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I appreciate all the work you do. So in your experience though, and I know it's kind of difficult because you haven't actually worked for a public forensics lab.
Mhm.
But when you interact with them and talk with other labs that you maybe augment or do work for, what are there any differences that really stand out?
Yeah. So for us, if you go to our website and like some of our t-shirts and all that stuff, it's our tagline is one case, one scientist, always. And so that's, in my opinion, the big difference between us and even other bigger private labs is for us, the second some evidence comes in our door, the person that opens that evidence takes it all the way through to DNA typing. They're doing serology tests, they're doing the cuttings of a swab, they're doing the extraction, quant, amp, everything. So the person that opened that evidence and was there could smell it, felt it, has a very intimate relationship with that evidence, takes it all the way through. And that makes the testimony part, if that ever comes to pass, very nice for any attorney or the jury for that matter. That way they don't have to call, oh, did you the one person that opened the evidence and sampled the blood stain and tested that? Then the next person, oh, did you quantify this DNA? And goes on to the next one. So that's, in my opinion, that's the biggest thing. Another difference between us and a bigger public lab is we're so small compared to these bigger public labs. And so we do very manual approach. We don't have these large automated instruments that can do, 96 extractions at a time. We're doing smaller batches, and we can take the care, we can hone in on certain samples where we can take a sample that's, not a lot of DNA recovered. We can concentrate that down to get as much DNA as possible and then go to that amplification step. And some other labs, they just don't have the resources or time to go back and do those extra steps, those kind of cleanup steps. So those are the few things that make us different than a bigger public lab or even a larger private lab for that matter.
So it sounds to me like you really focus on quality as opposed to quantity.
That is a fair statement. And, I did say we were small. We are small throughput, but I always joke with Susanna and other people that we are a boutique lab, not small, because once we get a first result on a case, we sometimes will call the investigator and say, hey, great news. What you thought was on this item is on this item. We're going to move forward with the DNA on this. Or, hey, it's not looking so good on that sample. Do you have any other samples you could send us, that we could try to get better results instead of just going through the whole thing and giving you an answer at the end? We kind of hold their hand as the whole process goes on. So that makes us a little different as well, I think.
That's one of the things that I love the most about you guys is and like I said, the other labs that we recommend all the time is that you have that amount of customer service that I think a lot of the bigger public labs miss. And well, in fact, we've even had some labs that say, we're a high throughput lab. We have so much crime that we don't have time to worry about something like the M-Vac. And
Sure.
So we're just, we're too high throughput and we process way too many cases to ever, integrate the M-Vac into the process.
That's the trade-off with the high throughput labs is they just don't have the time or resources to be frank, to process that kind of stuff because it is pretty labor intensive.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times it's not necessarily their fault. They just, that's the position, a lot of these labs are underfunded. They are overworked. The backlog is incredible, which is basically why private labs like you guys exist, because, some of the backlog, a backlog on a burglary is a lot different than a backlog on a homicide.
Oh,
and so
sure.
the cases that you guys get, I'm sure, are the more high profile, victim is a homicide or a rape victim, something like that. And so you get some of the worst ones.
Yeah, definitely the worst ones.
So speaking of what, you were just describing a case that sounded horrific to me. What, any of the really bad ones come to mind?
Well, there's one, I can't really give too many case specifics because it hasn't gone into prelim yet, but
Of course.
the victim was a female and we got some clothing. We got a beanie, shirt, pants, and some shoes, just completely bloodied up. And they wanted us to M-Vac. And I said, okay, yeah, that's a great idea. I agree with you. I think swabbing, we're just going to get victim because there's so much blood everywhere. So we got the items, processed each one separately with a separate head and filter. And they did not have a suspect at the time. So they were hoping to get a CODIS eligible profile that did not match the victim. And so when we hit the quantification step, and it showed that almost all of our DNA, it was, I think, 400 times more female DNA than male DNA, but we did detect some male. And so I let them know, hey, it looks like this is all going to come back to female victim. What do you think? And they said, no, go ahead and go forward. We have a possible suspect that could be female. So I said, okay, great. Ran that using Global Filer, which is the CODIS eligible kit. And lo and behold, everything came back to victim at like a great single source profile that matched the victim completely. And then as we're working on the report, I get a call from the detective and say, hey, we've got a suspect that just kind of fell in our lap. We've got a sample. Can we send it to you and maybe do a match there? And I said, well, yeah, because we did detect some male DNA there. We have a male specific amplification kit called Y-Filer Plus that basically only attacks and amps that Y chromosome. So we went back to the same extract, amplified it with Y-Filer Plus, and then amplified that reference sample of their suspect that just fell into their lap. And we ended up getting a match on there. So a case that they kind of thought was a dead end because the initial testing was like, oh, all the DNA we got is female. We did get a low level of male. And so using, our Y-Filer Plus technology, we got a really great result for them. So that was like one of the later cases we worked, so it's fresh in my mind. So that was pretty awesome.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, being able to solve cases like that, especially the older cases that, the victims and their families have just been, languishing for years. And then all of a sudden, hey, there's hope for this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you went to a conference recently. What was that about?
Yeah, it was actually just a small meeting out in Palm Springs. It was for the California Association for Property and Evidence. We've done some work with Palm Springs PD. And so their property and evidence guy, I believe we've talked a few times. He's like, hey, would you mind coming out and talking to us? It's, all these local PDs in the Southern California area send their property and evidence folks over. And so I had a quick, discussion with them, let them know about that we have the M-Vac, and it was shocking that probably half of the people there, out of it's only about 30 people there, half of the people never even heard of this thing. And
this shows you how much of a failure I am as a marketing guy.
So yeah, they were just, kind of wide-eyed and jaw on the floor when I was kind of sharing some success stories. And we also talked about some other technologies that we are helping local PDs with. But yeah, that was a fun little discussion we had yesterday. So
out of that, what when you say their jaw hit the floor, why?
Just, there was the case I just kind of mentioned to you right now. It's like and even so the other thing was, well, the case I mentioned just now, and then the other thing is I was listing the types of evidence that we get and we use the M-Vac on. And obviously clothing, I said, by and large, is the most popular item for this. And then they asked, like, well, would you just M-Vac anything? I said, oh, absolutely not. I would not M-Vac, say, a beer bottle. It's non-porous, it's glass, a swab will work just fine. And that's us being completely honest and upfront. We suggest not doing that. There's certain items, and I brought up a brick. I know bricks, we processed a brick in here before. Other labs have processed bricks. And even one lady said, oh, we just got 2 bricks in the other day. And I was like, oh yeah, can you imagine trying to swab a brick? The first pass, that thing's gonna be torn to bits. But using the M-Vac, you can get everywhere you want with that thing. And that's when they were kind of like, oh, the light bulb kind of switched on. And they're like, oh yeah. So, and then I gave the analogy that you like to use a lot is the carpet cleaner handler. And then they all kind of, you see, it's like kind of the feeling I get when I'm testifying and I see the jury all nodding their heads at the same time, and because they get it. That's the feeling I got. So I was like, oh, this is finally getting through. So
yeah, that's it's interesting when you're describing the DNA process, you know, from all the way from the collection all the way through to even if you have to use, you know, STR mix or whatever
yeah,
program you have, it's, you know, sometimes they just don't get it. And like you said, in explaining in a way that someone that's not involved with forensics on a regular basis, when the light bulb comes on, they're like, you know, yeah. And a perfect example is there's a cold case in particular that I'm thinking of that it's an older case, and the evidence was exposed both to water and to the elements, and so it's positive. The amount of DNA is going to be very, very minute. And the way I explain it, maybe you can help me out here, but the way I like to think of it is kind of like a pie. So if you have a pie that's maybe 12 inches across, if you use if you try one method and it doesn't work, then that pie isn't 12 inches across anymore. It's smaller. Now, the pieces of the pie could be the different people that contributed DNA to that specific area that you're sampling. And so the slices are actually different people, and different people are going to contribute different amounts to that 12 inches, the original 12 inches. But if you, like, say, for example, you only have, there's 20 cells there, and you need 10 cells in order to make a good profile, then if you use a swabbing first and you take 4 of those cells away, it doesn't give you a good profile, but now you're down to 16 cells. And so every time you try to use a method that's not as aggressive as the M-Vac, for example, then you shrink the pie. Now the slices are still the same. The ratio of the amount of people, you know, say there's 4 contributors, the ratio of whatever they're contributing is still the same. It's just the pie is smaller, and you've only got so many tries. And
well,
sometimes,
I mean,
go ahead.
So I like that analogy, but there is a possibility that the ratio could completely change. So if you're thinking about someone that touched an item, there's a mixture of 4 people, let's say suspects sneezed or something on that item, the swabbing could collect all that person's DNA, or, maybe that person is not of interest. You could get that person's DNA on the swab, and then the ratio could possibly change when you go hit it with the M-Vac, because now it's hitting everything under that top layer of DNA. Does that make sense? So it not only is diminishing the amount of DNA possible or possibly to recover, or possible to recover, you could be changing the ratio of contributors as well. So, yeah.
Well, it's I think, if somebody touches it versus somebody sneezing on it, that's going to be different. That's a different deposit method. But
Sure.
I think if you're consistent with, these 4 people touched it, then it's all going to be mixed together, and the ratio isn't going to necessarily change depending on how deep you go. But
Sure.
I mean, that's just kind of my understanding of it. But, DNA, how DNA is deposited, again, spitting on it versus touching it is going to be totally different, because,
Oh yeah.
different cells, different types. But, in the end, you're still kind of looking at limited amounts of DNA. Now, if it's like you said, that victim where there's, blood soaked everywhere, man, getting DNA isn't your problem. It's getting the right DNA. And, using in that kind of a scenario, it's not really going to matter what kind of a method you use. The victim DNA is just so overwhelmingly the majority that it's going to be tough. But that's cool that you were able to. I mean, that's when just the magic of DNA, at the lab processing level, where you've got the ability to focus just on that Y chromosome, which is only males. Then, yeah, those kind of things are just so cool, man.
Yeah, that was a fun case to give them a call and it's like, hey, guess what? You were right. This guy is looking like your guy. And then, you hear him kind of cover the phone, and there were some expletives. They were good expletives, but that was just a really good feeling.
Well, it's It's interesting. I don't think most people understand how invested some of these detectives and, you know, the guys that are face to face with the victim's family, especially. I mean, I've talked to homicide detectives and they're just like, you know, sitting there in a living room talking to a victim's family and telling them that their loved one is gone, and then I'm the one assigned to this case and I'm going to do everything I possibly can. I mean, how much more of an intimate moment can you possibly get? You know, I mean, maybe a doctor that comes out of an operating room that, you know, the patient has passed away on the table, you know, something like that. It's like, holy crap. I mean, not very many people are going to experience that level of an intimate discussion. But that's a bonding moment that these detectives have that I don't think anybody else really experiences just about anywhere. And I know, I don't know, I can't think of a moment where I've had anything that's remotely close to that. So, you know, so last thing is, are there any other cases, any other kind of evidence that you've been able to process that, you know, the listeners would just go, holy cow, how did you get DNA from that?
Not that you know, not off the top of my head. Just we have so many, and a lot of them are clothing, and it's, you know, we have this high expectation now with the M-Vac that if we don't get the result or any result, we're kind of shocked. So, you know, when we get a normal case, what we think is a normal case, and in my head is a normal case, but to somebody else, it's like, oh, how the heck did you get DNA from that? And it's like, oh, we use this, and, you know, and there's other ways that we use the M-Vac, not just as like a carpet style cleaner. We have done jewelry in the past. So what we do for that, it's a little different. So if you're thinking, you know, like a dangly necklace that, you know, is about this big and it's, you know, pretty much like a piece of floss. It's really thin. And then you think about the M-Vac head is about the size of a silver dollar, and trying to cover, you know, just a string, it doesn't really make sense. So it's like, well, how am I going to process this? And so what we do, we put that into a beaker and spray the buffer down and then vacuum up around it. And we do that a few times to get, you know, a full on soak of that item, and then suck up and capture all that buffer with all the DNA in there. So that's definitely an item that we processed in the past that's kind of outside the box way of thinking about using that. And that's, you know, that's just comes with experience with using the M-Vac. It's like, we're always thinking of better ways to process evidence. You know, sometimes a t-shirt might even come in and say, we might say, you know, maybe the M-Vac's not the best thing for this. Then we talk with the investigator and it turns out it's not. And that's, you know, then there's those times where we get some jewelry like, hey, can you swab this jewelry for DNA? And it's like, you know what, let's try the M-Vac because, and we, you know, give them all the reasons why. So there's always something better or something different that we can do with the evidence that's not the standard run of the mill swab and DNA. So
yeah, I really like that. And I think that is one of the integral parts of the lab detective, you know, investigator relationship. And you know, you could even include the prosecuting attorneys in there and just say, you know, or defense attorneys for that matter, if they wanted to get something tested. It's one of those that the feedback that you get, you're not the decision maker, but you know, as an advisor and as an expert in the area, and you're the one that's closely examined the evidence, and you know all these other methods that you could apply to it, then why wouldn't you give that advice? And I think, again, if we have the victims in mind and justice for the victims, to say the best way to get the truth from this piece of evidence is going to be swabbing or the M-Vac or the Y profile versus the you know, the generic profiling. You know, it's that kind of an intimate relationship with the investigator, and the information flow, I think, is such an integral part of, and should be an integral part of, this whole investigative process, that if you don't have that, then again, I think the victim itself, who's the end customer, isn't getting isn't going to find justice, and that in itself is just sad. So
yeah, that's another, we keep harping on the customer service aspect of being a private lab, and that's one of the biggest things that we get feedback on is, once we open the evidence, and let's say it's an old cold case, let's say it's just completely molded out and it was susceptible to water, the elements, things like that. We'll even say like, we can process this thing, but it's probably going to be a waste of time and money. And we're in the business to make money, like, don't get me wrong, but we're by and large, we want to do what's best for the evidence. And maybe there'll be something down the road that, not necessarily a new M-Vac type process, but new chemicals or new kits that could possibly, clear out all that mold and get right to the human DNA or something. So sometimes we have to tell these detectives, say, maybe now's not the time for this specific item of evidence because of all these problems. And then there's also the times when we open a piece of evidence and say, well, did you guys even notice this blood stain on the bottom of the shoe? Because you're saying to swab the top. And then they say, oh, no, we didn't notice that. So there's those aha moments as well. And where we were going to M-Vac the top of a shoe, we end up swabbing the bottom for the blood. So, a higher throughput lab might not have the time to stop what they're doing and make that phone call. And that's where we, as this boutique lab, can, stop what we're doing, take off our gloves and go sit at our desk and make a phone call. So we get a lot of, high and good feedback on those quick phone calls we give.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Congratulations, man. I'm like I said, I've been impressed with you guys from the day you opened your lab, and I know you do great work. And so it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So puregoldforensics.com, right?
That's it.
Okay. And anybody that wants to look up Pure Gold, definitely visit that site. And man, hey, it's been great talking to you, Theron.
Yeah, good talking to you, Jared.
All right. You have a good one, and keep up the good work.
All right. I'll see you.
All right, brother. Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.